My name is Zandile Tisani. I'm a filmmaker. I work predominantly in commercials. Some people do refer to themselves specifically as commercials director. For me, that would be only one of the things. I think the broadest term that I think encompasses most of what I do, I call myself a writer director. So a commercials director would work predominantly and mostly in commercials, and so that would be in pitching for commercials to advertising agencies, usually represented by a production company who will help you source work, and through then you'd execute commercial products together with an advertising agency for whoever their client is. Filmmakers, people who generally call themselves filmmakers or film directors, generally work in cinema in general, so that's for your more long-form feature-length films. Television directors who direct specifically television series are usually very separate from feature-length directors. TV directing is very different. In television, the emphasis is more on the writers and the writing, and so directors are very easily interchangeable. Whereas in feature-length films, it's a little bit different. Writers have less power in a feature-length world, and it's more emphasized towards the directors. Initially, I'd studied screenwriting. That's what I majored in, and I moved into directing. And writer-directors are generally the kind of people who we call the auteur filmmakers. So like the Spike Lees, Scorsese's, the big brands as far as feature-length films are concerned are usually filmmakers who write and then direct, or are very much involved in the writing process and have a very specific approach to how they like to make films, which is why they're so involved in the writing. Yeah, television, feature-length, commercials, those are generally the big classifications in filmmaking. It wasn't a direct path towards directing, and like I said, it was really out of necessity and having to work. I was a wardrobe assistant for a few years on commercial sets, and in those years I learned a lot because I was on set all the time, and so I knew what was going on. And from being a wardrobe assistant, I did production management, I've done casting coordination, a huge variety of jobs on sets, and that was really all out of necessity. I needed to work. I couldn't wait until my big passion to become a director was finally realized. But all of those things that I did out of necessity ended up being what informed my path to becoming a director, because then I knew what people's jobs were and I knew what people are doing. I think one thing I've realized about filmmaking a lot of the time is you'll often find that directors are the least experienced people on set. You have the idea, you might have a talent or the force of will to manifest, but people who work in crew work every single day on set. Doesn't matter what the set is or what the situation is, they're always working. Whereas directors only work when your project is realized. And so it's good to be able to respect what other people are doing on sets, because just because you're the director doesn't mean you're the most knowledgeable, equipped, experienced person on set. I'd studied screenwriting, and then after I graduated, I did like 2 years of photography, and I came back to Joburg, and finding work as a screenwriter is almost impossible. And most working writers are writing telenovelas, what we call TV dramas, but they're not dramas, they're kind of soapy/telenovelas. I didn't really enjoy that. I didn't like that. I did some of that. It really wasn't my thing. And I started to learn how to direct, so I started directing out of necessity. It was just that there wasn't work available in what I wanted to do, and so I had to put myself in a position to make that work. I think directing for me, people talk about it a lot, like something that's learned at school, and there is definitely that approach and there's that direction, but there are a lot of people I studied with who never became directors. And I know a lot of people who became directors who never studied it. I think it's really more of a decision that you make, and you follow it and you'll learn. And it's a job that you'll usually learn on the job as you're doing it. In the commercials world, I'll speak about that because that's where I'm at a lot now. So the way that directors get work is that you have to pitch for it, and you usually compete against other directors for that. Usually it's a 3-way pitch, and you will be given a brief and you'll pitch on that brief. But the first aspect about being a director in this particular sector is learning how to pitch and how to present your ideas in a way that people can understand. And within that is basically responding to a brief, which is, I think, one thing that really separates commercials and TV from regular feature length. It's not just about your feelings and your vision, it's about the brief and responding to the brief. And then once you've responded to the brief, if you get the said job, you have to start executing. And so you build a creative team, you build a team that you feel can execute what you're doing. And then once you've built the team, really your job is just coordinating everyone's work and making sure everyone's work is speaking to one another, no one's working against each other. If my stylist is working in blues and greens, I need my art department to know that, because it's all going to come together at the end. And so a lot of directing is about coordination, having the vision and then giving it over to other people, and once it's in their hands, coordinating it so it all works together. I think there's so many different kinds of directors, but I think one thing that's similar across all directors is having an idea of how you want to see things or how you want things to be executed, and being committed to and persevering on that idea, because everyone else at some point will leave the process or will come to the process late. So your DOP will be on set, but they're not going to be with you in the edit. Your editor will be with you in that editing process, but they weren't there in pre-prod. You are the person who has to maintain the integrity of the project from the time it's realized up until the time it's approved. So it has more to do with being a visionary and having a vision and having the perseverance to see that vision through, because it's going to change and it might become a little bit distorted depending on which stage of the process you're in, and for you to keep reminding yourself of what it's supposed to be and keeping it on track. The other thing about directing you must understand is that, like, as much as you're the director, your art director, your stylist, those are all fully fledged artists and able people in and of themselves, and so they're going to come with ideas or suggestions or ways to execute something, and you need to be able to listen to that and assess how useful or how applicable it is to what you're doing. If you're just going to stamp people out and turn them into your robots, basically, who are just executing what your ideas, well, that's one way to do it, but you must know that you're only ever going to get what's in your head, whereas if you're listening, you have the opportunity of tapping into other people's creativity. So I think listening is really important. I think also being able to focus on what's important at any given stage, because you'll be put under a lot of pressure at various stages, and pressure can sometimes be very distracting and you won't be able to make decisions properly, and so being able to calm yourself in the midst of panic and pressurized situations and make decisions is also, I think, a really important quality. I think you're never prepared for the fact, like, how many questions you have to answer all the time, non-stop. And I think the one thing that I learned, especially when I was still very green, was like, it's okay to say, I don't know, because that's when people can lean in and help you. And so I think I wasn't prepared for how many details there are in, like, making a film. There are so many questions that a person can ask you. Like, I remember the first film I made, the DOP came to me and he said, where are we putting the camera? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I hadn't really thought about it. It's just every single thing needs to be thought through. So I think I wasn't prepared for how detail orientated you have to be. Well, it depends on the kind of work you're doing. As a commercials director, absolutely. You need representation, not just in terms of sourcing the work, but to protect yourself. You need space between your director and your client. Client shouldn't have direct access to your director, because your director should just be thinking about creative, really. And it can be very distracting and to the detriment of the job to have direct interface with clients, for example, or things like that. And they're always going to try and take more than what they're supposed to give. And so you need someone basically backing your corner to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen. If you're the kind of person who is just trying to make a feature-length film once a year, I mean, in the South African context, not so much. There's just not much to represent you in. If you're moving overseas, sure, you definitely need representation. But I think in the beginning, people shouldn't worry too much about representation and worry more about developing an eye, developing a perspective, developing a style that's theirs. Those representation will come once you've developed those things. It's weird, but people will start to come, because once people see, even if it's not finished and it's still very rough, you can see someone who, like, has an eye and has position on the world or whatever, and that can be developed. What you can't develop is someone who doesn't have a perspective or a style, or there's nothing you can do with that. There's no amount of experience that's going to give someone that. So I think for people who are concerned about that kind of thing, I think focus on making work that you feel is relevant to you and to the way that you see the world, and they will come. people say it's a lot, like really glibly about you can shoot stuff on your phone, but you really can. Like, there's apps that you can download to edit on your phone. It's not going to be Citizen Kane, it's not going to be the next Scorsese, but it's going to give you the opportunity to get into the actual tangible thing of making a film, because it's not a conceptual thing, it's a tangible thing, and it's tactile, and you can start to teach yourself so many things. If you've only got access to iMovie, then that's what you use. If you've only got access to, you know, whatever you have access to, there's a way that you can make a film, and it's worth exploring those mediums. If it's not super clean and super high-end and super HD, doesn't really matter. That's not what determines a good film. It's not that it was shot on a great camera, that they've got perfect lenses. It's that there's a person behind, there's a personality, there's an idea, there's like a vision, and you should really work towards building that and stop trying to remake or participate in some idea of some high-end culture, because it passes so quickly, and what remains is the style and the vision.